name is Kate Butler, and I'm here to moderate the session, but I know we've got some amazing performers here who are naturals at what they do, so I don't think there's going to be much moderation needed. But I do want everyone to be thinking a little bit. We're hoping to have a couple minutes at the end to think about the theme of translation, bringing back some big ideas to the group. So hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that for a couple minutes. But I'm going to let David and Heidi and Lynda, I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us their story and make us think a little bit about what being Northern means, really. And I'm excited about that. So carry on, guys.
Thank you. I think we'll begin. Lynda and Heidi have lit the quelle, the stone oil lamp, and I think we'll begin by having them bring a little bit of music in, and then we're going to do a bit of a presentation. It'll be part music. We'll intersperse it with music, but a lot of what we want to bring forward is the way that we have worked together and developed a collaborative relationship. So I think we'll start. Lynda?
Yep.
Heidi?
Yep.
Thank you, everybody. I'm loving this space. Like, this space has such great energy here. I lit the quelle, so you guys can see the traditional source of heat and light for Inuit for many, 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 many years. It is a stone lamp. It could be also made out of copper and all of the rest of it. The oil that is traditionally used is seal oil or whale oil or anything like that. I don't have any handy, so I use vegetable oil, which isn't working as good for me as canola oil. So I'm going to switch back to canola oil. And then the wick was traditionally Arctic cotton and a moss. But again, I ran out of that. So I'm using cattails, or what's the bulrushes, some people call them. Yes, but they're two different plants, is what I understand.
Correct. I have a whole rant about that. We won't get into it.
Yes. So the ones along the side of the highway that all of a sudden go poof and explode, that's what I'm using. Whether you call them cattails or bulrushes. And yeah, happy to be here. We have a wonderful slide presentation. I think it's wonderful, and a wonderful talk, and there will be time for questions, just so you know.
So we called this presentation, "Which way does your compass point?" And it's a leading question, right? Because everybody's compass points north, or to the top of the world, as some people think of it. Here's a picture of us at one rendition of the top of the world. This is atop the Rockefeller Center in New York. So just an idea of where what we've been doing has taken us. We're going to explore a little bit how we've come together and worked together and the ideas that we try to talk about and where that might lead us. But I guess we'll begin with some introductions. I'm David Newland. I am a singer, a songwriter, performer, a writer, photographer, and I also work for a travel company, Adventure Canada, which does trips into the High Arctic and the Northwest Passage. That's how I know Lynda Brown and Heidi Langille, and I'll let each of you tell a little bit about yourselves too.
So I'm Lynda Brown, and I'm originally from Pengertung, Nunavut, which is about 200 kilometers north of Iqaluit, if you know where that is, on Baffin Island. But I consider myself an urban Inuk. We left the north when I was about 6, moved down south, Alberta, then Ontario. Actually lived not too far from here for a little while. And I've made myself at home in Ottawa for the last 20 years. And Ottawa is home to a large Inuit community. And in fact, I work in my day-to-day job, I work at an Inuit community center. I'm the manager of all our youth programs, and I get to do fun things like teach our kids how to drum dance and throat sing and things like that. And growing up, I didn't have a sense of who I was. Once we left the north, I tried to tell people I was Chinese, so I didn't have to explain about what Inuit meant. And it really wasn't until I became a parent, my oldest now is 19, that I really realized that I was missing out on a lot of stuff, and I needed to learn stuff to be able to pass on to my kids. And that's when I started learning how to drum dance, then throat sing, and it became kind of a thing that I did not to make money, but just to actually share culture. And I became a cultural ambassador, and I was actually doing a performance with Heidi when one of the owners of Adventure Canada saw us and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing that on a ship?" And we both said, "Yep," without even asking where the ship went. And best decision we ever made, because I definitely, on my first trip, met David and realized that our paths had actually crossed us several times before, just never really in the same, being able to explore and talk, and in talking with him, realized that there was a lot more that we could be doing to collaborate and share, and it's morphed into this wonderful collaboration, and I'm really grateful because it brings us, we get to travel and do fun things, and we love doing road trips, so we're happy to be here.
My name is Heidi Langille. I am also an urban Inuk. My family, my dad's side of the family comes from Labrador, and my mom is Dutch. I grew up in Ottawa, and at the time when I grew up, being Inuit was a shameful thing in school and in the neighborhood that I grew up in and all of the rest of it. So when I started parenting my kids, and I am a mom of many, my oldest is 27. And my youngest is 5. So when I started parenting, I did not want my kids to go through the shame that I went through in school, and started advocating and doing school presentations. And Lynda and I actually sat on the board of directors, or the parent council, of the Inuit Head Start in Ottawa that later became the Ottawa Inuit Children's Center. So we were founding directors of the Ottawa Inuit Children's Center, which has done so much incredible stuff. And so, yeah, I'm also a foster parent. My husband and I, we only foster Inuit children because we understand that having culture in the home is something that kids need to thrive, right? Which is part of my goal. So, one of the reasons why I'm here.
So, it begins in a way, there's a lot of places we could start this story. Obviously, everybody comes with their unique timeline. But I think in many ways it begins with, for us, with Adventure Canada. So this is a company, it's a privately owned, family-run company based in Port Credit, Ontario. It's been running for 30 years. And I never saw myself working for a travel company, although I've traveled my whole life. I never, to be very honest with you, never saw the possibilities that a commercial organization could be a change agent in the way that Adventure Canada tries to be. We're traveling on board small ships like this, roughly 200 passengers max, and it is an educational program as you go. People have paid, and they're going to the Arctic or Greenland or Iceland or Northern Scotland or even out to the Galapagos and Antarctica. There are people with money, there are people with privilege, there are people with influence. So the opportunity to go with those people and be a part of eye-opening for them is something like you two, when someone said, do you want to take your guitar playing and your storytelling and go on a ship? The answer was an obvious yes. And so all three of us have worked as in our capacities on board the ship. So Lynda and Heidi are both culturalists and performers, so representing Inuit culture helping to bridge in the communities where we go, and as well doing a ton of advocacy and education at the elbow-to-elbow level on board the ships. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work to do there, and there's a lot of difficult questions, and they manage in that environment exceedingly well. I think if I can say this, being bicultural or being familiar in a couple of cultures is a handy skill.
Absolutely. I have to say also, it's been because I've been an urban Inuit for so long, Adventure Canada allowed me to actually throat sing and drum dance on my homeland for the first time. So for me, it was a really incredible experience every time I go. But I always think it was Adventure Canada that got me up and being able to do what I learned down in the south up north.
Mm. Yeah, and for me, I host. I'm an MC on board the ships. We have daily gatherings, and someone needs to sort of quarterback that, and I do. I also drive Zodiacs, and I work for Adventure Canada year-round as kind of a brand ambassador. So that's what initially brought us together, and we had our independent work that we did. That's what drew us there. So Lynda and Heidi, as you've heard, Siqiniup Qilauta, Sunsdrum, their throat singing, drum dancing, cultural ambassador duo, well established, doing their thing, getting lots of gigs, and really busy doing that kind of outreach, and especially based in and around the Ottawa Inuit community, which is large and strong and growing, traveling around North America. I've been doing my gig as a singer-songwriter for a long time, in addition to the other things I do, and I've always sung songs that were about what I would call Canadian experiences. Appreciating that Canadian means a lot of things to a lot of people, and a lot of people don't wear that label comfortably. As a geographic label, that was something that interested me. And I think I'm going to move from there, and I'm going to play a song, because it's this song that kind of takes this project to the next level. So, to be perfectly frank with you all, I am a settler Canadian from Parry Sound, Ontario, a place that thinks it's north and is very passionate about that. And I grew up in many ways having what a lot of people now tease me about as a stereotypical Canadian experience. Splitting wood, boating around on Georgian Bay, snowshoeing, all those things you do as a kid in those rural places, and something I'm really happy to have had the experience of. But I also grew up steeped in the mythology that Canadians are constantly feeding ourselves, which is this idea of north, right? And it is more an idea than an actuality. If you live in Parry Sound, you live at 45 degrees north. You're just a little closer to the North Pole than you are to the equator, right? So these are stories we tell. And I grew up hearing those stories and then trying to map them against my own experience, which was, I was going to school with Anishinaabe kids, and we were having that experience, and a lot of that was not in those stories, and it was confusing, or they were in the story as a character, but wasn't the center of the story. So I walked with that for a long time, and when I got to the Arctic, I spent a couple of seasons on ships before I wrote a song, because I didn't have a thing to say about it. I only had my ears open. Your job as an artist is to tell your story, not somebody else's story. But you want to tell your story in a way that is useful, right? So after my third season, I arrived back with a song, a big Canadian epic folk song based on the true story of the Franklin expedition going into the Northwest Passage and never coming out again. And it's seen as one of the great heroic stories, it's seen as one of the great tragic stories, it's seen increasingly as one of the great mistakes of all time. And I found my way into the story via the mistake. And so you'll hear the mistake in this song, and I think it's a metaphor for how we need to go. The mistake was they didn't go with local knowledge, and they really came to grief because of that. I'll tell you in the song how they came to grief. All right, you ready? It's a big song. No way to stay warm, no port in any storm. We sailed with our flag unfurled for a sea route through the ice to the land of silk and spice, right over the top of the world. The word went back with the whalers. There are leads through the pack to the west, and we, poor ignorant sailors, signed on for the ultimate quest, for pride and a place in the story, to puff up our chests and brag, for the grog, the gold and the glory, the captain, the crown and the flag. No way to stay warm, no port in any storm. We sail with our flag unfurled for a sea route through the ice to the land of silk and spice, right over the top of the world. We made the tip of Greenland, and then battled Baffin Bay. Beyond us lay a mean land, winter on its way. We hunkered in at Beachy. We lost 3 men by spring. Oh, the times were far from peachy, lads, but we still had the strength and the spirit to sing. No way to stay warm, no port in any storm. We sailed with our flag unfurled for a sea route through the ice to the land of silk and spice, right over the top of the world. Then died a noble notion, no passage could we make upon that frozen ocean, boys. Our ship we did forsake, and in darkness did we stagger, in vain for a friendly coast. And gone was the sailor's swagger then, and the captain's courageous boast. No way to stay warm, no port in any storm. We sailed with our flag unfurled for a sea route through the ice to the land of silk and spice, right over the top of the world. Now the people of the Arctic, in their houses made of snow, pagans poor and rustic, thought we, what did they know? Oh, but we, with our maps and our guns and our tools, our lead soldered tins and high tea, well, we soon proved to be but the greatest of fools. We gnawed on our boots, begged for mercy, no way to stay warm, no port in any storm. We sailed with our flag unfurled for a sea route through the ice to the land of silk and spice, right over the top of the world. And now they tell the old tale with a frown and a shake of the head of men who braved the cold gale and wound up lost and dead. Now some would mourn our mystery, and they seek our scattered graves, but we've all gone down in history, boys, like our battered ship beneath the great waves. No way to stay warm, no port in any storm. We sailed with our flag unfurled for a sea route through the ice to the land of silk and spice, right over the top of the world. No way to stay warm, no port in any storm. We sailed with our flag unfurled for a sea route through the ice to the land of silk and spice, right over the top of the world. top of the world, right over the top of the world. Thank you. And now I have backup singers. I guess Lynda and Heidi have actually been singing along to this song the whole time.
Yes.
But I didn't know it until now, so that's great. And I hope it encourages all of
He's
you.
got the monitor and everything distracting him, so.
So what that song did for me is, first of all, it got me really charged up as a songwriter, that I had found a way into the story. And the way in was a critique of that story that we've been fed about the great white north. That term so makes me shudder, right? And I realized that if there was an appetite for those stories, Canadians are passionate about hearing their stories because they feel they don't hear them enough. What if we told them? But what if we told them with the hindsight and with the understanding, and if we could start to tweak the narrative? So very quickly, I started doing shows on the basis of this material, and I put a 5-piece band together, and we started doing shows in a little 60-seat theater in Cobourg, where I live. We actually started with a house concert and a couple of hotel room showcases. And the reaction in all those places was like something I'd never had to my material before. And I was so driven by the purpose of it that I became a much better advocate for my own songs. And the purpose was to try to put people's attention back north in a different way. And I've always loved to collaborate, and so I began inviting other artists to join me, and inevitably I invited Lynda and Heidi, and it was kind of initially, how do we do this? We worked together on a gig at the Canadian Canoe Museum, and then they came aboard on a gig I did in Ottawa, and then pretty soon, as you see, it evolved to where we are on the poster now. So I never wanted to be in a place where it's like they're my opening band. It didn't feel right, and it's not the intent of the work. We've had to work that out as we go, but as you can see, we've found ways to shape that and to incorporate it in the vision of what we do. We've had some amazing gigs in amazing places, everywhere from the Explorers Club.
First time in a weight room.
Yeah, this is that's true. You want to talk about some of the cool places we've gone?
Chichimon boat.
The Chichimon ferry, yeah, that was really special.
For me, it's been a really strange one doing it in churches because I have a really weird relationship with churches. My dad went to a residential school, and as such, never set foot in a church in his entire life after that, until my brother got married. But my mom was born and raised Catholic, and so she insisted that we went to a Catholic school. So I went to a Catholic school, but I wasn't practicing, and there was a lot of anger towards the church in my house growing up. And then as an adult, doing shows in churches that were selling out and the churches welcoming us, it's been a really strange journey for me to do that.
For me too, because I grew up in a church environment that I left as soon as I was able to make my own say-so, right?
I really hear what you're saying. I'm a recovering Catholic too.
Yeah. But I mean,
it's the Catholic guilt. What's up with that?
Well, I don't know, but let's talk later.
Okay.
That's what it is.
We'll probably get to this as we explore it, and we're sort of by way of introduction, getting our way there. But I know for me, one of the very biggest highlights of what we've done together was there were probably 400 or 500 people in Trinity United Church in Cobourg who were there on a Canada 150 kind of notion, and we'll talk about some of that a bit too. But Lynda and Heidi got 500 people throat singing in a United Church.
That's reason.
And what we see it as is an attempt to re-inhabit spaces, or to take that. There's an energy there that is positive and welcoming, and that's offering an opportunity to change the narrative. And so we follow that. As you can see, churches we're a pretty big deal. They only put me on the poster, but this is for all of us. This is in Sauble Beach, and as you can see, we're as big of a deal as the ham and scallop potatoes dinner. So we were making the big time by the time we got to Sauble Beach. And so it's developed, and we've been all over the province. I've also taken versions of the show, the solo kind of version, and toured around BC with it. And I've done gigs out in Calgary, Red Deer, Pincher Creek. And we're heading to the East Coast for the first time this summer. We've played Blue Skies, we played Summer Folk, Shelter Valley Folk Festival, Imaginate, a bunch of things. And not to be lost in the discussion is last night at the Meteor Cafe in Haileybury, where we shared billing and had a really, really great time with the folks there. So, you know, it's an experience that we had to work out. I'm used to playing, I built this 5-piece band, and I'm used to doing that, and that's one show. And then we added in a whole slideshow element and some storytelling that would talk about context and so forth. Lynda and Heidi, very used to doing what they do. Now they're doing what they do in the context of this overall thing that we've established, and how do we work this out again so there's not a hierarchy, right?
Well, and I have to say, there's a huge difference between how we learn how to throat sing and drum dance. It's not written down. There isn't, you know, it's been a really interesting learning process for us because we've actually been learning a lot more about music and how music is put together. David
What key is your drum?
Don't know that one. Or even what microphone do you use? I'm like, I don't know. So we've actually learned a lot from partnering with David and his band in exploring our more traditional music knowledge, but also, you know, every time we throat sing, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's the same throat song, every time we do it, it's different, which is very different from the music that is normally produced. It's once you've got it down, you pretty much stick to it. So it was a really interesting way of collaborating because they picked up really quickly on how to fit us into what they do without making us feel like we don't know what we're doing, which we've had that experience before. We've been part, like 40 choirs and orchestras, and the orchestra was probably the hardest one because they're very classical and they stick to it, and they're like, no, that's not how you did last time, you need to go, and I'm like, oh, I honestly don't remember how I did last time. Or the one where they're like, you're only allowed to throat sing for 30 seconds and then you have to stop, and it's like, how do I do that? Because I'm already counting what I'm throat singing. And so, yeah, it actually got to the point where I was doing this on Heidi's arm to try to cue her as to when we were supposed to be done. So again, finding that how to bring those two very different musical worlds together has been a really interesting process. And the fact that we keep exploring and trying new things, that exactly what David was saying. At first it was like much easier, we do our stuff, you do your stuff, and we're not sharing the stage, but now actually bringing it all together is a really different experience. And we love their band, like they can pick up on our speed, because sometimes we don't even realize, because Heidi's a little tone deaf. I love her, but she's a little tone deaf. So sometimes, you know, we might practice something where we're supposed to start off slow, but we get up there and we're like, and then the band said, okay, we're going to speed up with you guys.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is really something that a lot of people aren't aware of. Like, we don't write down our music.
I think that's a beautiful illustration of, I mean, the band, I have to say a word on behalf of my band. They're phenomenal musicians. They're much better musicians than me, and I'm learning from them as much as you guys are. Our name is a bit of a joke. The band is called Uncharted Waters, which is partly a little wink to traveling in the Arctic, and it's also a musical joke because we don't have anything written down either. And so, but it's also about a way of going, and the term explorer is very problematic for very good reasons, because it's always used to describe someone who's actually going somewhere that's always been thoroughly explored by the people who live there. But exploration is a bit of a metaphor for what we do, because we are learning as we go. And I think the thing that we all have in common, and especially the band are really versed in musics from all around the world. You know, we have an Irish flute and whistle and pipes player who can also play literally hundreds of other instruments. His son is a phenomenal bodhrán player, but he's also studied the daf and the cajon and all these other instruments of the world and the musics that they stem from. Saskia, our strings player, mostly plays violin and nyckelharpa, which is a traditional Swedish instrument, but her background is British, American, Black, and Roma, and in a whole interesting array of influences. Sam Allison, our bass player, is deeply... Yeah, and jaw harp too. He's deeply steeped in Americana, but is himself of mixed, multiple backgrounds. And so I think that we don't look at the musical product as the point of it. Music is a way that we do what we do. We're working on a live recording project that I was fortunate to receive an OAC grant from last year. And I realized halfway into thinking my way through that process, this isn't about a record. This is about the opportunity to bring a bunch of artists and an audience together. And what we do in making that record, if we do that right, a record is going to result that's going to be brilliant. But the most important thing will be that how we work informs us all. And that goes for what we're doing in churches. Look, I'm uncomfortable in churches. At the same time, I'm totally familiar with the United Church of Canada. So I know my way around it. I know who to talk to there. I know how to get gigs there. I know what their goals are. I'd say to their credit, the United Church did work on the reconciliation file following the Royal Commission, 20 years ahead of the TRC, right? So they have taken this on. They risked a lot to do that in their world, and they are very open to their space being used in this different way. Some churches wouldn't even have a quille on their altar, right? And so that's cool, and that's been a process because we go in and we go, well, if we're working with these folks here, we're bringing a different story to their audience than they would otherwise get. And they're saying, we want this story and we don't know how to get it. So they've got an audience, they've got a building, we've got a story, we've got a show, right? Is that, yeah. And so folk festivals have been another one for us that's kind of obvious, and that's one of the places we've been able to sort of work out how we do things together, because they're often very spontaneous. I'd love it if you told a story about winding up in the workshop at Summerfolk last year with some of your favorite performers.
Well, so Lynda and I have, most of our adult life has been spent in the nonprofit world and service organizations. So we got invited to go to a folk festival, and they told us that we'll be, doing 3 different workshops. And we're like, okay, well, workshops in the nonprofit service world is very different than workshops in the folk festival world, is what we discovered. So we're used to doing workshops, or this is how you throat sing, or this is all about the drum, or workshops in this sense was you're on the stage with 2 other bands. One plays one song, you play a song, the other one plays a song, and then you all collaborate together on something brand new. And we're like, oh, okay, well, let's do it. But that's not what we thought a workshop was. So we had the absolute pleasure of throat singing and drumming with a band called Murder, and the jerry cans. Now, how many people here have heard of the jerry cans? Mama Bill!
Yeah,
we were on
that's
stage
our breakfast song.
with the jerry cans, having an absolute blast. And it was just, the odd part is the first time we did it, it was like the Murder like rocked the crowd. And then we throat sang and nobody joined in. And then jerry cans rocked the crowd. And it was like, we told both Murder and jerry cans, like, feel free to jump in while we're throat singing. But as Lynda said, throat singing is very spontaneous. And even the jerry cans who know about throat singing don't know what sound is coming next out of Lynda and I. But we made it work. And I have a picture, and it's one of my favorite memories of
Well, and I also
summer.
found out I'm related to half the band. Not unusual up north. But what was, I think, really neat, I had never heard of Murder before. Totally dig their sound on stage. They started doing a song, a throat song just came, and I started going with it, and afterwards they're like, can you come record that with us? I'm like, honestly, I don't remember what I did. I'm like, yes, but I will come and do something new. So doing that kind of collaboration really expands our musical knowledge, and we wouldn't have gotten there had it been working with David, because I think we would have been like, oh my God, we don't fit with this. But we found a way, we were comfortable on stage. Even our kids who joined us in this, they came along. My littlest one was start singing, and she was just like, oh my God, you're sharing stage with your kids. That means you're big. That's not been her impression before, so.
Yeah, so we've
Where was that? Sorry.
Summerfolk.
Owen Sound.
Owen Sound, yeah.
I was there.
Like,
Cool.
Who was there?
You
were there?
I was there. I went to see Turbo Funk.
Right.
Because they just played last month at the theater. And Murder are in our next season.
Cool.
Nice.
They're awesome.
And I'm working on the jerry can.
Fantastic, yes. If you haven't heard of the jerry cans, look them up. They are absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
So this is a slide that I labeled opportunities and growth. And what this actually is Lynda and Heidi performing last night at the Meteor Cafe. And I mean, it's one of those awkward things. It's like we're in a weight room now, right? You know, and last night we were in a cafe minus the 5-piece band, minus the sort of big theater style screen that we're used to and some of the production values and a sound guy and everything like that. And I think that degree of riskiness is part of what we've done, and this is still very new. We've been doing this 2.5, 3 years. And we've been in some places that involve real risk, and they won't say it, so I want to say this on Lynda and Heidi's behalf. You know, churches are one thing. We played at the Royal Ontario Museum for the Explorers Club. You cannot imagine a more colonial place or group of people to try to connect with. We then got invited to play at the Explorers Club, and we played in a room that had Robert Peary's sled hanging on the wall. There was a polar bear stuffed in the next room that was shot by Rudolph Valentino. There's like, that's weird.
And if you do, the stories you hear about Perry, he had a very negative impact on the Inuit.
He was terrible.
He was like one of the biggest thieves.
Yeah.
And so that was a really strange feeling having a performance in that space too. Part of what Lynda and I do, like our songs came from our elders. They don't belong to us. They came from many years ago, and if it wasn't for them keeping it up while it was banned, we wouldn't be here. And so Lynda and I don't feel like we have an ownership over any of the songs that we do. And so one of the things that has helped collaborating with David is, like Lynda and I have had to turn down some gigs in the past because it wasn't a safe space. And we knew that our songs would be used in good intentions, but with malicious results, and we didn't want that. Working with David, he ensures that the space is safe for us to share the songs of our ancestors and our elders and our people without it being used in a malicious way. So
how do you mean? I'm not doubting what you're saying at all, but I'm fascinated by good intentions are one thing I understand, and the result. How was it twisted to be malicious? And I'm not challenging you. I'm just curious.
Many years ago, Lynda and I, when we first started, we were asked to do a performance on Parliament Hill, and we researched it a little bit and thought, okay, this looks pretty good. Let's do it. So we did it. It turned out to be a political organization that still to this day uses our image.
Oh, I see.
And their political views aren't what sits well with us.
Oh,
but we had researched it beforehand and had conversations with the organizers just to ensure, right? But it's still, it didn't end up being a great.
Yeah, I understand now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
There's a lot of complexity. I mean, I could thank you for saying that I do my best to make it safe for you. As I said, I think it's your courage and openness that carries the thing. But it's true, there's a lot of work that goes in from all of us to establish context and to be secure. And a word that I hope people become more and more familiar with over the next while is cultural safety, right? This is a big issue on the ships where we're asking people to, more or less, whether it's the intent or not, they wind up representing their people, which is something that's a pretty heavy task for anyone to try and do. And, you know, last year, I might as well just bring this forward. Last year, this Canada 150 thing, we had to navigate that very carefully. I don't know an Indigenous person who's interested in celebrating Canada 150. I think there were many people who understood that it was an opportunity for acknowledgement and for possibility to be expressed in a new way. That's how we treated it. We also saw that there was money flying around that was going to go to some programming that could reflect something within that experience. And I got to say, even as the Canadian singer-songwriter, that is a side interest for most people. Most people anymore are not writing songs, even about lumber and trains and all those things that seem like classic characters. The world has largely moved on. So even at that, I was getting opportunities that I hadn't seen in a long time because they're like, oh, we need that Canadiana guy, right? You know, so we had to negotiate those things. You know, that church that I said that became a real highlight. I'm glad we did that. But the way that came about is a woman approached me and said, I think we have some Canada 150 stuff, and I think I could program you with your Arctic show. I said, okay. She said, we want some northern content, some Indigenous content, so I think you'd be great. I was like, not a northerner, not Indigenous. I'm not that person. But I can get you those people. And I'd be so glad to hook you up with Lynda and Heidi. Let me just describe what you want, and then I go back and forth with her, making it the right shape for them before I even go to them, because I'm not going to make them do all the work. Well, she comes back to me, well, no, oh, no, that's great, thank you. We want you too. Okay, fine. We wound up with me doing a little part as well, and that's great. I'm happy about that. But that's the kind of work that we have to do. Like, long before I'm going to invite Lynda and Heidi to join me at the Explorers Club, I'm going to figure out what's in it that matters to our higher values. That's why we do this stuff, right? And we all do a lot of compromising to make that work. Like, Lynda and Heidi took days off their job to come up here and do this thing, because it's important to them to do that. You know, on the New York trip, I was invited initially to the Explorers Club to come and perform, and Adventure Canada was going to fly me down and put me in a hotel. And then we got that little thing at the ROM, and they really liked what we did, and they said, well, could something like that happen at the Explorers Club? So I went to Adventure Canada and said, so what if I drove down and stayed on a buddy's couch? Could then all three of us go? Well, if it doesn't, sure. Like, and so, you know, like, those are the kind of things that we do to try to make it happen, but it's always around the goals of the thing, how we can use it, right, for the positive outcomes that we're hoping for.
Funny story about the Explorers Club, driving down, the three of us. Normally, I have a hard time at borders because of my sealskin hammock and all the rest of it, and I have to explain that I'm not importing them. It's traditional clothes. According to your rules, they're allowed and all the rest of it. This time on the border, they had a problem with David. That was a birth. She's like, no, you natives are okay. And we didn't correct her on that. And she's like, you, however. And she's looking at David. It was fine. It was brochures and like, it was fine, right? And we did get through.
I think they called you Inuits, actually.
Yeah, Inuits. Yeah,
Said,
that's true.
Are you all Inuits? You're okay, but you need to be careful.
What was the reason for that?
The reason was that as a musician, if you're going to go to the States and play a paid gig, You need to have a P2 visa.
Oh,
But
okay.
we were not getting paid. We were
Yeah.
guests
Yeah.
of Adventure Canada at the Explorers Club, and we had paperwork to say so, which is the only reason they let us in. But what she said to me was, they're charging money at the door, so even if you're not getting paid, you shouldn't be doing that, because otherwise musicians could sneak over the border, go to events, say they're not getting paid, but the venue's charging money, you see. So it looks like you're getting paid anyway.
So lesson learned.
Lesson
You're gonna do
learned
the PT
for all of us.
in
God,
the
borders.
future. Yeah.
But that driving down thing, I mean, that was like a 9-hour drive down to Manhattan. And then we got parking for free in front of the venue.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That's something to celebrate.
I know, right? There wasn't even traffic going into New York. It was like all the trouble was at the border. But here we are yesterday working on the presentation in the van out in the parking lot. And we put this slide in here because now we're getting into the guts of this, okay? This is an example of an artistic collaboration that is also a personal collaboration. Our families know one another, our kids are important in one another's lives. Every time Lynda and Heidi and I get together and we're at a festival, my kids go home throat singing, and we can't not do it that way, especially because of the stakes here. This is about our collaboration represents in miniature the actuality of life for settler people and indigenous people on this land. We have to figure this thing out, and it's a 24-hour-a-day job. I'm the lucky one because I can leave it behind in a way. We were talking about this the other day. If Lynda or Heidi goes to the grocery store, they can have a totally different experience than they were expecting to have, because to someone else they look different, right? And I can sneak around on that. But it's a commitment, and I feel like, what did we come up with? Maybe 50% of the time we spend in the vehicle is talking about the issues arising from our work, the content of the songs, the reaction of the audience, how we frame what we do, who goes where on the poster, and it's kind of backwards in that we're both trying to advance the other person. Like, I hope I'm okay to share this, but I said about a year ago I was getting really, really burned out, and I said to Lynda and Heidi, I'm getting tired, and I would really love it anyway. But to me, this whole thing would be perfect if it just worked out that you could just get gigs and do, because the goal is to get Inuit voices out there. I'm the bridge to Southern Canadians who have an interest in that thing. And I think it was Heidi, we said, you can't quit on us, man. We need you. Because of access, right? We both have access to different things. And that was important for me to hear. And I'm sharing it today because I think it might be important for other allies to hear, if that is what you're...
Well, I also strongly feel that David can say stuff to the audience and put the audience, generally speaking, in an uncomfortable space in a comfortable way. Whereas if I were to say the same thing, it wouldn't come across the same way. So that's why we need you. That's one of the reasons why we need you.
That was an insight for me, because I always feel that, and a lady said it after the show last night, she said that you guys present important truths in a very non-threatening way. I'm certainly grateful if I have that opportunity. But again, this negotiation of roles and stuff, I think one of the reasons that we succeed at it is because we're always thinking about the other person, right? I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about them. As it turned out, they were worried about me too. So I think that's important. Conversation is something that came up a lot when we talked about this, and we just talk about everything. All the way through. Every venue is different, every opportunity is different, every audience is different. every show is different. Sometimes things happen that work. When we went down to the Explorers Club, we had never just done the two of us before, at least not since the Canoe Museum, and that had really been a sequential thing. Like, they did a thing, I did a thing, James Raffin did a thing. Now we were going, it's like we have this amazing opportunity to go to the Explorers Club. And I don't think we did it 100% right, but it was so important that we did it. And I've developed the belief that there's a lot of people who would like to be helpful with their art, who are afraid of making mistakes, who are afraid of offending people, who are afraid of getting it wrong. And as a result, they're not letting their light shine. And I get it wrong all the time. But I hope that we collectively get it right more than we get it wrong, you see? And as a result, something's happening that wouldn't otherwise happen. The title of this thing was, "Which way is your compass point?" And this is what the chart looks like where we go in the Arctic. And the challenges around this stuff are pretty steep, actually. So what's your compass, right? If you can't rely on a geographic compass. And I feel like a moral compass is kind of what we're asking people to look at. And is there something you'd like to say about that?
I think it's time for either a game or a song.
Yeah. So our next picture was indicating that. So should I bring it up here? This darling little girl. Do you want to do a game?
Sure. Anybody want to learn an Inuit game?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect space for it.
Yes. Wonderful. Let's do the stick pull, Lynda. I need audience participation for this. You want to come up?
Sure.
Fantastic. Come on up.
There's a few, like, is it, I'm asking this in front of everybody. Is it easy for you to get up and down from the ground?
Yes.
Okay. So
Well, for an old guy.
What about the sky?
The
Ceiling?
The sky.
So for this one, we sit down, facing each other. Like, you sit there.
So one of the great things about Inuit games is that we require little or no equipment. So as you see in this one, it's just a stick.
And then on the count of three, what we're doing is you're trying to lift my butt off the ground. I'm trying to lift your butt off the ground.
And
Just by pulling on the stick.
but our feet stay on. We don't touch feet.
No, we're supposed to actually be touching toes. Yeah, like that.
Okay.
Ready? You're strong. 1, 2, 3.
I did. I'll try that again.
Now you know what it is. Yeah.
There's technique here which I'm not getting.
Yeah.
One of the things I've learned,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't take Heidi on any games other than throat singing. That's the only thing I can do right now.
Ready? 1, 2.
Anybody else want to try this one? Who then?
Yeah, that was good
That's
though.
very
You were being charitable.
Anybody else want to try this one? I saw it.
So
You want to try it?
I'll
Physics
try to
involved.
use like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
for
my
sure.
shoes.
Oh yeah, those are
Those are no, quite the shoes.
Who's
special
gonna help
shoes.
with this?
Okay.
I can't.
Oh, okay. You're gonna
I'm
go
gonna
against
go-
her.
Heidi and I often bring our kids along to do the games demonstrations now.
That's right, me either, so that's why we'll do it together. Okay, so like this?
Yep, and then on the count of 3, you try to lift the other person's butt off the ground.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
That was a unique way of it.
Anybody else want to try this one? All right, the next one, we're going to do one more.
Is that game? What's the name?
Stick
of
pull.
Pardon?
Very, very original. Stick pull.
Stick pull. Okay.
We're not the greatest at naming things.
No, we're really not.
1 foot high
It's a
kick,
very
2 foot
practical.
high kick, arm pull.
Yes.
No
Cheek pull.
Cheek pull, yeah.
Not doing the cheek pull.
I don't do cheek pull.
Me neither.
Cheek pull is you stand with your arm across somebody like they're there, and you pull each other's cheek, right? Yeah. So
I don't like it because I don't know where other people's fingers are.
I don't think that's the game my father. So my father's from Montreal, and he went up north, and that's where he met my mom. And in order to impress my grandfather was actually hoping to get rid of my dad. He didn't want him dating my mom, so he challenged him to cheek pull, and my dad actually won. So from that moment on, my grandfather was like, "Okay, you're okay."
I could win the cheek pull.
Yeah, whoever gives up first, because it hurts.
Oh.
You could dislocate somebody's jaw that way.
Not so
Or
much
the-
dissipate. You end up ripping it, and then you give up first.
I see.
Yeah.
It's just ripping.
A lot of our games do end up where you end up bloody, like the knuckle hop. The winners typically have no knuckles left,
That
or
barks your knuckles.
head pull. They've had ears rip off at the Arctic Winter Games and stuff. So a lot of our games are really about what can you endure.
Yes. Speed, strength, agility, anything that will help you live off the land, and sometimes that involves pain, right? But those aren't the games that I'm teaching you. So one more game, and this is the arm, like a balance game. Arm pull. It's not really the arm pull. It's a balance game. So I need another. You want to come up again? This uses different muscles.
Okay.
Right? And if he beats me, then I might just challenge him to the leg wrestle, because my pride will be.
Nobody beats Heidi at the leg wrestle.
I have lost once to the leg
You can come
wrestle.
to the middle now.
I can come to the middle. This way. I've lost a few more times than once, but the latest time I lost at the leg wrestle was with a male police officer who was in full uniform, and I tell him it's because I could feel his gun like on my hip. But anyway, so we're going to face opposite directions. You face the audience, and then we're going to put our feet together, and then take a step to the side, bend your knees. Yes, and we're going to hold hands up here. And then the whole point of this is we're going to push or pull.
Oh, okay.
And I'm trying to get you to move that leg. You're trying to get me to move this leg, right? And we're not allowed to use this hand. I'm not allowed to push you this way or anything like that.
Okay.
Okay? Everybody got it? Atausic, mako, pinasu, ati.
He's working out the physics.
All right. When I say a T, that means go. Atausic, mako, pinasu, a T. You come on now. What's that?
It's judo. Yeah.
There's a technique to these things.
There is.
Absolutely.
So does anybody want to try that one?
It's fun. Give it a try.
Yes. Nope. You can try it when there's not an audience.
Yeah, you guys can go take it home and do it.
Yes, try it when it's not an audience.
Did we lose our picture?
Well, we
I
turned it
just
off.
turned it
Oh,
off so
right.
I wasn't blinding them.
Yes, but I think we should turn it
Okay.
back on again. Okay.
So we made a bunch of notes, which we now can't see, about some of the challenges. I think we've illustrated what the opportunities are.
I think we covered challenges.
Do you think so? Yeah, I feel like we were going to take questions at the end, but I feel a bit like inviting some of the questions around that particular issue, around the challenge piece. Like one for sure that comes to mind is, because it comes up a lot in those difficult conversations in advance, is representation. Like just an enormous number of people in Canada are simply not adequately educated, even how to talk about Inuit or Indigenous people broadly. They don't even know the nation of people in their local First Nation, right? And there's a whole lot of people mixing up. They don't know when to say Aboriginal, when to say Indigenous, when to say the local nation, etc. So I feel like...
And we get it's very confusing. Like, we know that. there's Aboriginal, there's Indigenous, there's First Nations, there's Métis, there's Inuit, there's Native, there's Eskimo. Like, how do you name a group? And that's part of the challenge for all of Canada.
Well, one of the things we do struggle with, and we were talking about this on the way up, is the land acknowledgement. So as you're going around more and more events, you hear people saying, I'd like to acknowledge the land we're on traditional whatever. In Ottawa is Algonquin, and Toronto's got a whole list of them, Calgary has a whole list of them. So it's popping up, but it's one of those things where we've been talking, and we haven't done it, and it's not been a part of our show, and part of that is because we're not sure what to do that. Part of that is, when I think about it, I'm like, I know I'm not from Ontario, and I probably should be recognizing the land of which the traditional people were there. But I also feel like I've made my home in Ontario, so it's a weird dynamic. I totally understand the First Nation perspective around land acknowledgement and treaties and things like that, but Inuit, we have a very different way of looking at political things. In fact, we don't live on reserves, we live in communities, we have land claims, we don't have treaties. So even like if you look at the political stuff, our whole history and background is very, very different from the First Nations perspective, and definitely different from the Métis perspective. So challenges, we struggle a bit with this land acknowledgement because I don't know, it's not something that Inuit tradition would do either. So I think that's where we're like, maybe we should start doing it though, or do we? And if we do, how do we do it so that that it feels right to us and it acknowledges where we're at? So that's definitely one of the challenges that we were talking about on the way up.
One of the things, we often play in places where land acknowledgement is absolutely done, and as someone who sometimes hosts folk festivals, I'm very used to delivering land acknowledgements, and I'm proud to do that. One of the puzzles for us was, because people do come in with such a high degree of ignorance, you offer a land acknowledgement, let's say to the Anishinaabe, I'm positive half the audience is now going to believe that the Inuit standing in front of them talking about Nunavut are interchangeable, right? And with Anishinaabe. And I've come to the conclusion that on balance, I think it's something we should do anyway, and just work to move past that barrier. But I put it in our notes in part because I wanted to confess that that's been a puzzle, even though it's a no-brainer for me in every other context. It has been a puzzle. And that said, we had, after we did a big show in a Toronto church last fall, I had a lady come up to me and say, that was sensational, we just love what you did there, that was really special, and our community was happy to be involved because we had worked with their choir and everything like that. Their choir even sang in Inuktitut, a song in Inuktitut
well.
that Lynda often does. But anyway, she said, I think though you should really do an Atlantic novel. So I thought, well, that's interesting, and in a way that's great. Like, first of all, we need to take that, we need to be able to question ourselves and go, like, are we getting this? We're not getting it, you're not necessarily getting it right just because you're X or Y, right? But secondly, that this settler person wanted that. I think that's a win too, you know?
My personal hesitation with the land acknowledgement is I was always taught if you know something is wrong, you work to fix it, right? If you apologize, you don't do that thing again. And if we acknowledge that we're on unceded territory, what are we doing to fix that, right? And I feel like some folks use, not all, but some folks use the land acknowledgement as my work here is done, when the work with the relationship between Canada and its Indigenous people is at the very beginning, right? Like, we're at the very beginnings of that stage. So that's where I struggle with the land acknowledgement, and I have to figure it out because of where I live and the work that I do, and I will figure it out, and then we'll figure it out in our own way. Check back in about a year and see where we stand on land acknowledgement. Right, like this, because our show, it constantly evolves and changes. So.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of many puzzle pieces. I had an extensive conversation yesterday. Actually, Frank, it was during the presentation of the gentleman who went before you in the cinema.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people saw that, but the gentleman is with the Brookside Music in Midland, and they did what really seems to have been a remarkable piece, and it had a lot of similarities to how we work, where he brought in essentially a classical or Renaissance composer, because there was, well, they were going to acknowledge the 400th anniversary of Champlain arriving in the Midland, what's now the Midland region. And so there was some local desire to celebrate that. And he wanted to bring in Indigenous collaborators. And the first thing they said is, we're not celebrating that because half the people died of disease in the 25 years following that time. And so they landed on the term commemorate, right? So that is a different thing, and that acknowledges that history occurred and that it's important and so on. And he went on to just talk about the ways that they had worked together, and I was feeling this similarity with some of the challenges that we face. And at the same time, I was texting with a friend of mine who couldn't be here, but who is Anishinaabe and who is deeply interested in these kinds of discussions, and it's a running dialogue that she and I have. And she has strong feelings around commemoration, even commemoration versus celebration. What is the role of Indigenous people in celebrating a colonial, or in commemorating, talking about, telling the story of a colonial kind of event? And we said this, we had this conversation yesterday where I said, I don't know if 25 years from now, people are not going to listen to my songs and go, that guy was so colonial. I like to think I'm pushing the bar of how those stories have been told, and I'm tweaking the narrative and all the rest of it. But it might be that 25 years from now, to talk about Franklin at all with any degree of sympathy is going to be something that we've moved on from. I don't know that, but I have to be willing to. Well, I have to be willing to take that risk, because I think as artists, that's what we do. You know, I think Picasso said, an artist responds to their muse, to their time, and to art itself. And so, in some ways, I think what we're trying to do is respond to our time with the language of our time. There's so much interest in Franklin. I mean, they found the ships. There's a British TV series about it. There's an exhibition at the.
And I do feel sympathy for him. Don't get me wrong. I do feel sympathy.
Yeah, and every Inuk I've ever spoken to feels sympathy for Franklin. Like, and Louis Kamukak, who was a friend of ours who sadly passed this year, he was the most dedicated researcher on the subject of Franklin that there ever was. The Inuit oral history that led to the finding of Franklin came through Louis Kamukak, and he admired Franklin. And by the way, our show's not all about Franklin. Franklin is the door into the show, because it's the, and I have this shorthand, which is like, come for the Northwest Passage, stay for the Inuit culture, right? And that is the goal, and we wind up the second part of my show has moved from those explorer tales, which make great subjects for folk songs, into contemporary sounds and feelings around Inuit communities. And a big part of what I would like to see happen as we continually shift this neighborhood and narrative is that we mentally put the people in the Arctic. Because in the Southern Canadian perspective, there's very little imagination of that. The notion is that the Northwest Passage is this route through emptiness, and it's not. It's through a territory that's, as I said, it's been thoroughly explored, completely, it's sparsely populated, but it's a homeland and it's a peopled place, and so we're trying to move it to there. And but that is that fighting against that notion, as well as fighting against our own ability to get it right or wrong. Is it right or wrong for us to be collaborating in this way and using that as a starting point? We begin.
It's also, where I struggle is this walk between two worlds, because it's really easy to talk about very traditional Inuit lifestyles, you know, living in tents or mud houses or igloos and traveling by dog sleds, and you know, the things you think of when you think of the like 1950s Inuit or Eskimos as they called them back then, to fast forward to where we are today. I can tell you there's not many Inuit that would want to go back to a lot of that hardship that we experience living in a traditional lifestyle. But the values that we have from there are what we want to continue. And how do we do that in an urban setting? And I think this is part of why we do the work we do with David, is because we don't want throat singing, drum dancing to be that historical, oh yeah, it was nice when they did that kind of thing. We want to bring it forward into the you know, evolve it and bring it forward, but we also want to make sure we're not bringing it so far forward that we've lost actually the values that actually come behind why we drum and why we throat sing, which is why I think this works so much, because I think we don't just do the music and expect you guys to know what we're trying to convey. We intersperse all the what we want to kind of convey. This is why this song came together, or this is how we work this together, or you know, this story inspired this song, and this is how we got there. Because without it, the music does stand on its own, it really does, but I think what happens when you see us doing it live and you get all these pieces in between, it gives you a much fuller picture, and it's bringing the Inuit culture forward, acknowledging the past, but not being so stuck to it that, you know, we can't say, okay, boys can throat sing, girls can drum, those kind of things. We've moved that a little bit, but I also struggle because our culture was really squashed by the church. And so a lot of times, Louis probably experienced a lot in talking to elders about, you know, traditional stuff, because the church kind of put parameters around like drum dancing and throat singing. They wanted to squash it. My grandfather was a drum keeper. He used to keep a drum in different pieces all around the community, so that when he went out hunting, he'd grab the different pieces and be really far away from the community before he started drumming, because he knew if he drummed close to the village, the missionaries would have issue with it because they thought it was very pagan. So I think that's one of the things that we also challenge, is how do we make sure that Inuit culture stays alive and strong, but it's not so that people are stuck thinking that, you know, we still sit there and like licks to survive. And how do we make sure that you guys walk away with some understanding of where we come from, with some understanding that, you know, we don't live in tents. You know, we drive cars, we play video, like we do a lot of that same stuff too, but the values that like Inuit have, I don't know if you know, First Nations have what they call the 7 grandfather teachings. Inuit, we have 8 Inuit IQ principles. That actually, IQ stands for a really long word, I won't even bother saying it, because just look up Inuit IQ values, and we have the same kind of ideas around what the values are, and I think that's what we try to bring forward when we're doing our work.
And I think it's time for a song. You guys want to hear another song? Yeah. Fantastic.
So this song really cues off of what Lynda was talking about, because we're hopeless if we don't find our common points. I mean, we can agree that it's very, very difficult. I always believe that truth needs to come before reconciliation, and the truth is we're in a difficult place because of what colonialism has imposed here. But the way to move forward from that is going to be an acknowledgement of shared realities. The bottom line is we're here sharing now. Whether we all want to or not, whether that's being effectively done or not, it is a reality. And what I love about the Arctic is that because there's fewer people, because the communities are smaller and fewer and far between, it becomes a very useful way to look at, in miniature, something that is actually the case broadly, right? And so, for example, like when we go with the ships, we'll go into a community. In this case, it's Cambridge Bay, but it could be Johaven, it could be Arctic Bay, it could be Quilauta, Pond Inlet, Greasefjord, on and on and on. Kikitarjuak, Pang, Kuujjuaq, Kangits, Waluluaq, and others. And so This is something that's very common, though, is that if the passengers have been led around town by their guides, they've met some people shaking hands, some kids have come up and they've let the kids take pictures of them, and they take pictures of the kids, you name it. Here we are in a community center, right? And what do we have? We have an elder wearing her Mother Hubbard parka and kamiks, but next to her we have some youth here who are wearing caribou parkas and, you know, dyed hair like teenage people will do. You know, we're in this modern gymnasium sort of facility, but here on the floor is a polar bear, harvested, skinned, and prepared and demonstrated. Muskox, same thing. The drum, which had so long been essentially banished, is now present. And these two guys are going to play fiddle and button accordion. So you're going to have the throat song, and you're going to have the drum dance and traditional elements. This is also now traditional, because they've been playing fiddles and button accordions and doing jigs and reels since the 1820s, 1830s, when the Scots whalers brought that music. And it's stronger here than it is in the South, and probably than it is in Scotland.
Yeah.
And but this is a commonplace. This is where our stories unite around something that's really positive and interesting and special. I mean, likewise, the cloth for those Mother Hubbard parkas, you wouldn't see that pattern in the North, or in the South, but I'll tell you, it wasn't woven in the North either. That was brought through the Hudson Bay Company. And so we're implicated in each other's stories, and I wrote this song to reflect that. And at a certain point, we found a way that we could actually do this song together, which is really cool. The song is also dedicated to country food, which we would get a chance to taste in an environment like this. And I've been fortunate enough to have seal, flesh, kidney, heart, liver, brains, narwhal, muktuk, beluga, harbor porpoise. I've had minke whale, all kinds of stuff.
Flipper soup? Flipper soup?
I have not had flipper soup. No.
Have you had iguna?
I don't know.
Iguna?
Is that the
Fermented walrus?
Yeah, I haven't had that yet, but I'd like to.
I think you have to grow up on it to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Personal thing, it's from a different community.
I mean, funnily enough, I really enjoy country food. Lynda doesn't indulge, right?
But my daughter eats everything. Her favorite food right now is fish eyeballs.
I like the land country food, not so much the man. Although I do eat mukta, which is good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anyway, so I wanted a song that was a celebration of this community thing and also a degree of advocacy. I'm totally 100% evangelical about country food because it's the healthiest thing going, and it's out there, and it's to be hunted, and it's sustainable and full of goodness for Inuit and their guests. And so,
and I don't eat much country food, but I do eat this.
In gratitude, I wrote this song, and actually last summer I got to take it back to the place where it was born, which was Joe Haven, and perform it there, which was really cool. This is Cambridge Bay, but anyway. The song is named after my favorite country food, muskox stew. Ready? Muskox stew, caribou, Arctic chub, muktuk too. You better try this. Wouldn't want to be rude. Traditional victuals, country food. Muskox stew made for you. Better try a little of the homemade muskox stew. Arctic games, you wanna try. Arts and crafts, you wanna buy. Arctic life, what do people do? Well, we have our strife and our good times too. Muskox stew made for you. Better try a little homemade muskox Everybody wants to take a photograph. Hey, drum dancer, dance your song. All the others sing along. Sing along. Here come the fiddles, now hear them playing. Children running every which way. Everyone together on the old gym floor. Can you dance and swing? Can you dance some more? Dance more. Time to leave. Wish it weren't so. Ships away. Gotta go. But I miss those kids and the elders too. Miss that smell. Muskox stew made for you. Better try living homemade muskox stew. Muskox stew made for you. Better try living homemade muskox stew.